Chapter 2. On March 14 of 2021, a month after Ronnie's proposal to Belinda, David's father, Bill, had reached that point in his life that he was ready to retire. Getting up early in the morning, to take the half-hour drive to Hayden's power plant, had been the norm for Bill, and the life that his entire family had learned to live and adjust to. Pulling into his driveway, in Ridgeview, Bill climbed out of his truck just as Patty came out to the porch. "Enjoy your last day." She spoke loud enough to be heard from across the street. On the opposite side of Exmoor Road, Miss Hunt was climbing out of her Eagle Talon. As she was walking onto her porch, she turned towards Bill's direction after Patty yelled, "Well, of course I am, honey. I get to spend the rest of my life with my fishing pole." "I'm joking," Bill said as he closed the truck door. "I'll spend the rest of my life with you and the family." Just as Bill finished, he had taken the last step onto the porch as he gently wrapped his arms around his wife. "Oh. I love you, Bill." Then, as she looked at her watch, she realized that she had better hurry to her own job. "But it's time for me to get to my own job." "That's all right. Just one more year and then you and I will be home together on a permanent basis," Bill chuckled as he let go of his wife. "All right, Patty. I'll see you in a little while." Because of the cool weather, Bill headed back into the house shortly after Patty's car was out of sight. Exmoor Road is one large hill, with their house at the very top of the hill, on the west side of the South and North Running Street. The bottom of the hill, or as far as he could see from his drive, curved to the left, then stopped at a street that the Ridgeview Elementary School was on. Walking back into the house, Bill decided to call and let David and Karina know that he was now officially retired. He had also felt that perhaps he should try to visit them more often as well. "Well, how about you guys go out to dinner with your mom and I tonight?" "Well." David paused. "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. How about the Holiday Inn tonight at 7 o'clock and Karina and I will pay?" "If you insist, I won't say otherwise, son. Your mom and I will meet you there. Okay?" "All right, Dad. We'll see you then." As planned, both Bill and Patty did share dinner together at the Holiday Inn restaurant. Also, as planned, Karina and David paid for the meal as David's parents were excited about the new home schedule. That following May, Malachi's birthday, seemed to roll around fairly quickly as they welcomed the end to the winter season that seemed to be much cooler than usual. "Look, Eddie," Ronnie said as he pointed out the kitchen sliding glass door. "There is only that little bit of snow in the corner of the fenced-in yard left." "Yeah, I know. Now perhaps we could look into taking a vacation or trip somewhere by flying. It's been too cool outside to fly around very much," Eddie said, and then turned around as Malachi came out into the kitchen. "Well, happy birthday, Malachi." "Thank you, Eddie." Just out of bed, with hardly any sleep, Malachi's hair was all matted to one side of his head. To put it lightly, it looked as though Malachi was suffering from a hangover. "Hey Malachi." Ronnie spoke up, "Mom, Dad, Grandma Sanchez, and Grandma and Grandpa DeClue are on their way over to celebrate your birthday. You might want to jump into the shower real quick." By the looks of Malachi's face, it was obvious that his brain was still snoozing as it took him a moment to respond to his brother. Like Ronnie's marriage proposal to Belinda, most of Malachi's birthday plans weren't written in stone until the last minute. Even at that, none of the plans were made by Malachi at all. Soon, as Malachi had followed Ronnie's suggestion, he had quickly gotten into the shower. Within about 10 minutes after getting out of the shower, Malachi's parents and grandparents arrived at the house. As each one of them had reached the top of the stairs, where Malachi had stood to greet them, they each had either ran their fingers through his ear-length long hair or lightly hugged him. With this, they had also each said their own individual happy birthday greeting as well. "Happy birthday, son," Karina said as she wrapped her arms around him, 23 years old now. "Can hardly believe that it's been that long." Then, as Karina unwrapped her arms, she raked her fingers through the entire length of his hair. "Thank you, Mom. I really appreciate it," Malachi said as he was suddenly brought to the realization of the difference in appearance of age between his mother and that of his father. Then, immediately afterwards, had also noticed this difference between this Grandma Sanchez and his grandma and Grandpa DeClue. "Hey Mom." Yeah, honey? Karina asked as she was just about to meet David in the living room. Ronnie's and Malachi's parents had brought brats, hamburgers, and hot dogs to grill out in the backyard. In a bag that Karina had in her hand, were the spices that David liked to barbecue with. I guess that it might sound crazy, but a question in regards to the appearance and age between you and Dad, and also the difference between Grandma Sanchez and that of Grandma and Grandpa Declue. Well, Malachi, I had always wondered when it would be that either you, your brother, or someone else would pop the question. How about you, Ronnie, Eddie, Nicole, and Belinda all come on downstairs so that we can have a private conversation in regards to this subject? In fact, handing the plastic bag to her son, go take this bag to your father. I'm gonna go tell the guys to head down the stairs and tell your Grandma Sanchez to prevent anyone else from coming down there. In about 5 minutes, everyone was standing around in Eddie's bedroom wondering why Karina had requested them to group up. What's going on? Eddie asked as he scratched the side of his head. I was just questioning the appearance and age between Grandma Sanchez and my mom. I don't understand why they both look only half their true age. How old is your grandma supposed to be? Eddie asked just as the bedroom door opened and then Karina entered. 104 years old, Karina said just as she walked into the room. After stepping in, Karina turned around and made sure that the door was securely locked. 104. Eddie repeated with a look of shock in his face. How can she? Eddie, Malachi, Ronnie, Nicole, and Belinda. I guess that as time goes on that we'll deal with different individual issues as they come along. With daywalkers guys, or females vampires, we can only live as long as 200 years old. Until that time comes, however, we will tend to appear only half of our actual age. So that's why Mrs. Sanchez only looks like she's in her early 50s. Eddie interrupted. Yep. Now, with male vampires, your aging process is much different. Male vampires' aging stops at the age of 21. This, of course, is only true so long as you are harvesting. Just as Karina's last few words came out of her mouth, Eddie's bedroom door opened as Mrs. Sanchez quietly walked into the room. 0 hours. Hi Mom, Karina said as the older women walked in. Hi dear. I thought that perhaps I too should have a talk with the kids as well. A little talk about the dog as you brought to my attention a couple months ago. Well, sure, Karina said, might as well get that out of the way also. But, I'm gonna go on upstairs and make sure that nobody comes down here. Okay? Okay dear. We'll be up there soon anyhow. David just put all the meat on the grill. Mrs. Sanchez said and then turned back towards the kids as Karina walked out. Well, let's see here. Marie started as she held her hands clasped right in front of herself. Ah, Grandma. Malachi spoke up. The same day that I had brought this up to Mom, James, Lloyd, and Sterling had told us a lot about Spud and Hounds of Hell. Well, Malachi. Marie interrupted, just to make sure though, let me cover all basics into the Hounds of Hell. Okay. Yes, James, Lloyd, and Sterling may know a lot of the issue well, but between them and I think that it's safe to say that all possible points may be brought out to you guys. All right? Yes ma'am, Eddie said. Grandma will work Eddie. All right. Spud, whom belongs to Malachi. Saying this, Marie turned to face her eldest grandson, is called a Hound of Hell. As long as Malachi is alive, Spud will also live. Spud will protect everything and anything in this world that Malachi loves. Spud can also receive ESP messages just the same as our male vampires. Though our dogs cannot fly, they can run at speeds that would leave any other dog in the dust. A Hound of Hell can go long periods of time without food, however, this can hurt the dog as well. A little raw blood will keep the Hound of Hell in tip-top shape. Just the same as with you guys. Pausing a moment, Mrs. Sanchez looked everyone in the face. Any questions, guys? Nope. I think that we've got everything now, Grandma, Ronnie said. I think that maybe we should get ourselves upstairs though. Dad's starting to wonder what's up. Well, in that case, right after you guys, Marie said and then pulled open the bedroom door. Just as the door opened up about 6 inches or so, Spud came in and jumped his front feet onto Malachi's legs. Bending down, Malachi picked the dog up. I love you, boy. Malachi thought as clear as he could. In response, Spud turned to face Malachi and then licked the end of his nose. Ah. You got bad breath, Spud. It was almost 9 months later, the beginning of February of 2022, as Ronnie and Belinda were preparing to tie the knot. It was an extremely hot summer that had quickly turned into an extreme cold that would have had any Eskimo begging for warmer mukluks, yet the weather forecast had promised, more than once, that the cold air would lift before Valentine's Day. It's gonna be alright, Ronnie. You and Belinda still have almost 2 weeks to go. Nicole ensured. Besides that, the church is just across the street. We did it when Malachi and I got married. I know. In fact, I don't even know why I'm worrying about it, Ronnie said as he stood up from the table. It's just... Ron. Malachi interrupted. You're worried because it's one of the most important days of your life. Walking right up to Ronnie's side, Malachi put his hand on his shoulder. And I promise you that it will be the greatest day of your life. Look at it this way, at least you won't or shouldn't have to worry about getting trapped in the church because of the sun. Taking a step back, and towards the coffee machine, Malachi continued. I remember how you, Eddie, Nicole, and I had to speed fly our way home after mine and Nicole's wedding. Yeah. I remember that too, Ron said as he began to look more relaxed. Setting his coffee cup down next to his brother's, he watched Malachi fill both cups before picking up the hot container. We had to wait in the foyer of the church while Grandma held open the front door to the house. Mom made some capes with black material that Grandma had. Then, together, we all flew out of the church, across the street, and then into and then landing in the basement of our house. That was a very interesting way to end my wedding, Malachi continued. It would be kinda neat to come up with a way to make yours interesting as well. In its own way, that is. Yeah, Ron said as he sat back down and sipped out of the cup, but, let's first make sure that everything else is set to go. It was about 2 months prior to this point that both Ronnie and Belinda had been fitted for their wedding suits. Ronnie with a 6-piece lavender-colored tuxedo, and Belinda with a wedding dress, once again in lavender, with a 12-foot tail. There was so much fancy work put into Belinda's dress that Ronnie was more excited about her dress than what he was in his own tuxedo. A couple of days after buying Ronnie's tuxedo and Belinda's dress, they had purchased their wedding rings. This event took longer than what it would have taken most people. But there are so many choices, Belinda said. It was a jewelry store in Denver that they had gone to, and somewhere, within the 4.5 hours that they were there, they had found a perfect set, 18-karat solid gold with exactly 20 diamonds, embedded within the half-inch wide band. $3,475 each. When Ronnie and Belinda had walked out of this jewelry store, their eyes were glued to the receipt that was tightly secure in Ronnie's grip. You know, Ronnie said, with this, we could have bought a brand new car. I know. Belinda answered, I wonder how much Malachi's and Nicole's cost. Then, as they looked into Belinda's purse, they could momentarily set their eyes on the set of rings, in their individual boxes, and then soon staring back at the receipt. Now, as Ronnie sat down with his cup of coffee and talking with Eddie and Malachi, he began to worry about every small detail that could have possibly been at risk. Malachi and Eddie, however, did all that they could do to convince Ronnie that everything would turn out perfect. As February 13th rolled around, the entire family gathered at the church as they rehearsed for the following day. Lucifer, now 32 months old, would be the ring bearer. Eddie would be the best man, Larry Wallace would give Belinda away, and Malachi would photograph the entire event. Since the time that Malachi and Nicole had gotten married, Malachi had obtained equipment, for his computer, that would further excel his ability to make perfect pictures and videos. Since Malachi had gotten the equipment, he had been looking forward to the perfect moment to use it. Ronnie's wedding would turn out to be that perfect moment. So that there wouldn't be any last-minute problems, Marie had made sure that the kids had their black capes within the church. To decrease the chance of a problem, however, it was planned that the reception party would take place in the church rather than at the house. Also, with false excuses that Karina had just made up, they had the windows to the church covered. Then, along with these steps, Karina and Marie, together, went through the entire church looking for any possible problems. Well guys, David said as they walked out of the church. Tomorrow is the big day. For the most part David had hid the fact that he was almost on the verge of tears. He just couldn't believe that his youngest son was now about to marry. Deep within his heart he felt that he wasn't there enough for the kids as they were still young. It was like as if life had just moved a long way too quick for Dave's liking. "I am so proud of you. You've really grown up to be a great man, and now, tomorrow, you're gonna be a great husband. I love you, Ronnie," David said as he then stopped walking and embraced his son in both arms. "I love you too, Dad," Ron said, and then turned his head just enough to see a tear running down his father's face. "Hey guys. Wait up." Turning around, David and Ronnie saw Malachi and Eddie running towards them as they were all headed towards the house. It was about 10:30 at night, dark without any light from the moon or stars, only some light from the light pole in front of the house, and then light from the church behind them. With enough distance between the house and church, it almost appeared that it was pitch dark out. To make the situation worse, there was nearly a foot of snow on the parking lot and road. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning when Karina had called to announce that her, David, and Marie were on their way over, the normal time that Ronnie, Malachi, and Eddie would have been headed off to bed. As Ronnie hung up the phone, he, along with Belinda, Nicole, Malachi, and Eddie went through a checklist of many items needed for the wedding, along with things that needed to be done around the house. "Hey Lucifer," Nicole said as she walked into his bedroom. "It's time to get ready for Uncle Ronnie's and Aunt Belinda's big day." About 6 months prior, Nicole and Malachi had replaced Lucifer's crib with a twin-size bed. This was done after Lucifer had climbed out of the crib as he jokingly escaped its perimeter as he ran from Nicole. He climbed its gate faster than what she could move. "Uncle Ronnie and Aunt Belinda marry today?" Lucifer asked with a weird smile on his face. "Yep. Come on now, it's time for you to take a bath before we go to the church." "Can I have bubbles?" Lucifer interrupted. With his question he quickly pulled off his one-piece pajama suit and left it on the floor. "You can have bubbles if you hurry. And not make a mess out of the bathroom, Lucifer," Nicole said as she bent over to pick up his pajamas. Seconds later, Lucifer ran out of the bedroom naked with his mother right behind him. Out in the kitchen, Malachi was running around trying to make what would amount to another dinner, or at least a small snack. "Eddie. Come on upstairs, we're gonna eat real fast before we head to the church." "Okay. I'm almost on my way. Just getting this suit on." Eddie thought as clearly as he could. Lavender wasn't exactly his favorite color, however he was excited for Ronnie and Belinda enough to not even care if the suit was pink. As he left his bedroom, heading for the stairs, he fixed the collar to the shirt. Then, as he walked into the kitchen, Malachi, Ronnie, and Belinda all turned to face him. "Wow. That looks great on you," Ronnie exclaimed and then walked up to his friend. "Thank you, Ron." Looking at Ron, Eddie noticed that all he had on was the pants to his tuxedo with his dress shoes. He was wearing nothing on his upper body. "Not quite ready yet?" Eddie asked. "Oh. I'm ready, I just didn't want to take a chance of getting anything on it while we're eating." As Ron said this, Eddie reached out towards his belly. "That never made any sense to me, how you and Malachi can't grow chest hair yet you both have a perfectly thick and naturally groomed trail down." Quickly Eddie grabbed a hold of some of the long hairs below Ronnie's belly button. "Here." "Ouch. Let go, man." Ronnie was joking, but the hairs being pulled did hurt a bit, especially those hairs closer to the belt line. Looking down to where Eddie had pulled, the surrounding skin had turned a reddish color that made the black-colored hair stand out that much more. It was only about 10 minutes later that David, Karina, and Marie had shown up to the house. As they walked in the front door, Nicole and Lucifer were just walking out of the bathroom. Lucifer held on tightly to his mom's hand and was acting as though he was pulling her along. Lucifer was now fully dressed and had his dark hair brushed back. "Well," Ronnie spoke up, "I wondered how that little tuxedo would look on him." As Ron said this, he walked over to the entrance of the kitchen to greet his parents and grandma. "Hi guys," Karina said as she walked into the kitchen, "You guys look real good. You know, Ron, you might consider putting the top half of your suit on though. I just had it off while we snacked before the wedding, so that I don't mess it up right before." "Hey. What happened?" Ronnie's and Malachi's father asked as he pointed at Ron's belly. Instantly everyone's attention was on the red spot just above his belt level. Simultaneously Eddie hid his face behind a newspaper that was laying in the center of the table. With this, no one had to say Eddie's name, everyone just turned their heads towards the table and stared at its only occupant. Hidden behind the paper. "That's all right," Ronnie said, "he's just jealous that he can't grow a trail like ours." It was about 30 minutes later that Corina's cell phone began to chirp. She spoke into the phone for about 2 minutes and then, as soon as she hung up, announced that it was time to go. "Larry said it's time now," Corina said. Larry, a few of the other City Hall employees, a few police dispatchers, and then Nicole's mother, Lorena, and sisters Amanda and Shant, had gotten up early and headed over to the church to decorate for the occasion. For the most part, up until it was time to leave, Belinda was quite full of smiles but quiet. Because of the extensive length of dress and fragile fabrics, she decided to wait until they were at the church to put it on. At 8 o'clock everyone was at the church and ready to do the ceremony. As time got closer to the wedding, Ronnie and Belinda were becoming more and more nervous. With the build-up of tension, Ronnie found himself to be pacing back and forth throughout the church. "Hey Ron. Relax a little," Malachi said as he found his brother sweating so badly that beads of sweat were building on his forehead. "I'm trying to, Malachi." "Hey Ronnie." Malachi interrupted. "You're looking great, Belinda is looking great. And the wedding is gonna be great also." Pausing for a moment, as Ronnie and Malachi were alone. "Come here Ron." As Ronnie approached him, Malachi wrapped his arms around his little brother. "Today is gonna be perfect little brother," Malachi whispered. With this, Ronnie allowed himself to melt in his brother's arms as he knew that Malachi was right. "And you are the perfect groom." "Hey Malachi," Ron said. "Yeah? I love you. Thank you for being here for me," Ronnie said as he pulled himself away from his brother. "I love you too Ron. Now, come on, we've got a wedding to do." Moments later, while friends and family sat waiting for Ron and Belinda, the church's organ began to play. "Okay Ronnie, there's Belinda, I'll see you guys out there." Standing together, just outside of the chapel, Ronnie, Belinda, Larry, and Lucifer were ready to open the front doors to the chapel and head out in front of their guest. "All right hon. I'll see you out there," Ron said, and then, about 2 minutes later, entered the chapel through a side door, and then sat down at the inside seat of the front pew. As the rear doors of the chapel opened, Ronnie stood up and faced the back of the chapel as Belinda and Larry stood together arm in arm. Behind Ron, at the front of the church, stood Eddie, Corina, David, and then the priest, Father Tom Carland. As the music continued to play, Larry and Belinda proceeded slowly towards the front. About 10 feet behind them, Lucifer was walking in, almost, the same pace, as he held a little lavender-colored pillow. On the pillow was 2 rings that seemed to gleam a brilliant yellow in the light. With each beat, from the organ, Larry, Belinda, and Lucifer took another step, until soon, they had reached the front pew where Larry handed Belinda off to Ronnie. From that point, Larry sat down and then Ronnie, Belinda, and Lucifer continued. When they reached the point where David, Corina, Eddie, and the priest were standing, Ronnie and Belinda stood side by side of each other as Lucifer stood just off to the side, right next to his grandma Corina. Moments later, the music stopped. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We gather here today to bring together, in holy matrimony, Belinda Roz and Ronnie Edgar de Clou. Now Belinda." The priest continued in a quiet tone, "Please repeat after me. I, Belinda Roz. I, Belinda Roz." Nervous, Belinda could now feel a bead of sweat running down her back. "Agree to take Ronnie Edgar de Clou's hand." To signal when it was Belinda's turn to repeat his words, Tom nodded his head towards her. "Agree to take Ronnie Edgar de Clou's hand. And to cherish him forever and ever, through sickness and health. And to cherish him forever and ever, through sickness and health. Until death, do us part. Until death, do us part." As this phrase came out of her mouth, you could almost see her shaking as the all too familiar words left her lips. "Now Ronnie, please repeat these words after me." With the priest's direction, Ronnie nodded his head to acknowledge his words. "I, Ronnie Edgar de Clou. I, Ronnie Edgar de Clou. Agree to take Belinda Roz's hand. Agree to take Belinda Roz's hand. As Ronnie said this, he seemed to simultaneously pull her hand close to his own heart as he lightly squeezed. And to cherish her forever and ever, through sickness and health. And to cherish her forever and ever, through sickness and health. Until death do us part. Until death do us part. As these words were said, Ronnie had almost began to feel faint. Now, if anyone here had reason to believe that Belinda Roz and Ronnie Edgar de Clou should not be joined together in holy matrimony, please say so now or forever keep your peace. As the priest said these words, he then looked around the chapel to see any possible rejections. Then, without seeing any, he continued. Now Lucifer. Come over here with the rings, Tom said. Wanting to do exactly what was just asked of him, Lucifer first looked up to his grandmother. Then, as Karina gave him a light push, he stepped forward with the pillow. Now Ronnie and Belinda. Please exchange rings, Tom continued. Immediately Ronnie grabbed hers, while Belinda picked up his. Then, as they began to put them on one another, they looked each other in the eyes. It is now, through God, that I grant Belinda and Ronnie to be together, as one, as husband and wife. Ronnie. You may now kiss your bride. With total silence throughout the chapel, everyone watched as Ronnie kissed Belinda and then together, they all began to cheer and clap. Close, to the front of the church, you could hear a loud whistle. Immediately looking out into the crowd, out the corner of his eye, Ronnie saw that his brother was the whistler. Congratulations Mr. and Mrs. Ronnie de Clou. You're gonna make a perfect couple. As the ceremony came to an end, everyone began to walk into another section of the church. This particular church had movable dividers that turned it into multiple rooms. If need be, the entire church could be transformed into just one big room within a matter of minutes. As usual though, it was separated into at least a dozen rooms. The two biggest rooms were the chapel and then the one that would be used for the reception. The first two people out of the chapel were Ronnie and Belinda. Then, as everyone followed them into the reception room, where tables were set up off to one side, many different people had began to take turns talking to Ronnie and Belinda as they congratulated them. Off to another area of the room, Karina and David were talking to some other family friends and showing pictures of Ronnie's childhood. On the tables, centered on them, was a large 4-tier cake that Patty and Bill de Clou had paid for. Actually they had paid for and arranged everything within the church. As everyone was busy talking and visiting among each other, Ronnie and Belinda hadn't even noticed that David, Karina, Marie, Patty, and Bill had all slipped outside of the church. Part of the reason that nobody had seen them leave is because Malachi and Nicole had kept the guests' attention elsewhere. Eddie had turned on a stereo that he had hoped would entice some of the people to dance. Soon, just as he had hoped, Larry was dancing with an older woman, about his own age, off to the far end of the partitioned room. Malachi had turned Ronnie's attention to the cake and a couple figurines that were on the top tier. The figures were of a bride and a groom slow dancing with each other. About an hour later, before Ronnie and Belinda had a clue that their parents and grandparents had even left, they all came walking back into the church with smiles on their faces. Slowly, pots, bowls, and pans of food were slowly accumulating on the tables, as different people had went out to their vehicles, and then returned moments later with their hands full of either food or gifts. Most had brought both. Soon, and seemingly without instruction, everyone was soon sitting down at the tables and preparing to eat. The tables were arranged in a way that they formed a horseshoe. With chairs only set on the outside of this horseshoe, Marie, Patty, and Bill helped pass different dishes of food around from one table to the next. As the eating frenzy had slowly come to an end, soon David and Karina had taken over the area, between the tables where Patty, Bill, and Marie were serving food from, and then began to hand Ronnie and Belinda gifts. There must have been at least 150 presents. This process alone took over an hour. As the last few presents were opened, Malachi and Nicole had began to cut the cake into many slices. The top tier, however, was set aside. Before anyone was to start eating their piece of cake, Ronnie and Belinda were to first feed each other their share of cake, of which ended with Ronnie and Belinda both having cake spread throughout their hair and face. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," David announced over the volume of everyone else, when everyone's finished eating dessert. "We have one last gift for my youngest son and daughter-in-law out in the parking lot." As David looked at Ronnie and Belinda, he saw another surge of excitement go through their faces. Coincidentally, it seemed that everyone had quickly finished their individual servings and then put on their winter coats. Unknown to Ronnie and Belinda as they led the crowd outside, David had already gotten out there and was waiting for his son-in-law daughter-in-law to exit the building. Then, as Ronnie and Belinda stepped out of the building, they found themselves looking at a brand new, 2022, black-colored Hummer. Very much like his brother's, yet brand new and black rather than the banana yellow. Thankfully, the weather was just plain old cold rather than the miserable freezing temperature that there had been for the majority of that winter. Also, unlike Malachi's and Nicole's wedding, there was an overcast that allowed Malachi, Ronnie, and Eddie to enjoy the outdoors. With this, Ronnie and Belinda were able to quickly climb into their new vehicle. Overall, the wedding didn't only go as planned but had also turned out better than what Ronnie and expected. At this, the wedding exceeded by a long shot what Belinda had expected. In the end, everyone was happy. "Mom and Dad. Thank you," Ronnie said just as his parents were about to head directly home from the church. Keeping his hands in his pockets, as he spoke to his parents, through their car window, his darker complexion of skin defined his pink cheeks as steam poured out of his mouth with each breath. Rather than walking the short distance to the house, kitty corner, Malachi, Eddie, Nicole, and Lucifer decided to ride with Ronnie and Belinda in their new Hummer, that had been warming up for the previous 15 minutes. "Well, you're welcome, Ronnie. But I think that you had better thank Grandma and Grandpa DeClue and Grandma Sanchez. We all pitched in," Karina said as she laid over David's lap so that she could see her son's face through the driver's side window. "All right. I will tonight, so that I'll know that they'll be home." Saying this, you could see Ronnie pushing his hands deeper into his pockets, wishing that they extended down to his knees as his fingers sought out his body heat. "Okay, honey. You better get going before you freeze to death out here. How about you guys take a ride and see how you like it? Then, tonight, you guys can call me too and tell me what you think." "That sounds like a plan to me. Maybe we should go to Steamboat Springs and ski for the afternoon. If the weather works out for us, that is. You guys spend time outside." David interrupted. "I never knew my boys to have a life outside." "Dad," Ronnie said as jokingly as possible. "Honey," Karina interrupted, "don't pick on the boys." Karina, Ronnie, Malachi, Eddie, Nicole, Belinda, and Lucifer, after 24 years had managed to keep the entire thing about vampires out of David's knowledge. This isn't to say that periodically there wasn't some jokes made in regards to the boys' extended teeth. Some of these jokes involved David calling his children, Eddie, and his grandson his little vampires. If only David knew the truth. "I'm joking, Ronnie. Come here and give me a quick hug," David said as he stretched his arms, through the window, and towards his son. Then, as Ronnie buried his face into the side of his father's neck, David continued, "I love you, son. And congratulations." "I love you guys too, Dad. And thanks again," Ron said as he pulled himself away from his father. Moments later, David and Karina were headed for home as Ronnie, Malachi, Eddie, Nicole, Belinda, and Lucifer headed off to Steamboat Springs. "You know, Nicole," Malachi said as he began to lay down for bed, "ever since I had that last dream, with Lucifer in it, I haven't had any more nightmares." "That must mean that Lucifer was the last character in your dreams that you hadn't identified then," Nicole responded, as she brought her legs down onto the bed. Then, as she sat up to pull the covers over herself and her husband, she stopped and then looked back at him. "You know, I haven't had any terrible nightmares lately. However, I can hear Miguel talking to someone far off into the distance. The conversation is too quiet for me to hear who he's talking to." "You know," Malachi said as he turned over to face Nicole, "I never heard the voice of Miguel, nor did I hear or see the young boy that Lloyd, James, and Sterling has spoken of. Also, like you just said, None of you guys are being affected by Miguel Sanchez at all. In fact, Eddie, Ronnie, Belinda, nor Lucifer seem to be having any problems right now with Miguel. Makes me wonder. It had been nearly 2 months since Ronnie's and Belinda's wedding. Within that time the weather had warmed by at least 40 degrees and most, but not all, of the snow had melted away. As the weather became warmer, the birds and other small wildlife, such as squirrels and groundhogs, that usually hibernated for the season, were now out and about as they were also enjoying the warmer season. Well, let's just sleep on it for now, honey. The sun is gonna rise within the next half hour or so, Nicole said as she turned onto her side facing Malachi. Alright. I love you, hun. Malachi responded and then lightly draped one arm over her. As the last day of May rolled around, on Eddie's 24th birthday, Eddie had received a surprise phone call. Yeah. He's here. Can I ask who this is? This is his mother, Beth Yeesh. I'm calling from Pennsylvania. Alright. Just hold on a minute please, Ronnie said as he pushed the pause button on the cell phone. Holding the phone to his chest for a moment, Ron, through his ESP, asked Eddie to come upstairs without saying why. Moments later Eddie could be heard climbing up the stairs. What's up, Ronnie? Eddie asked as he only had boxers on and a t-shirt thrown over his shoulder. Ah. You've got a phone call, Ron said with an odd look on his face. Then, as he handed the phone to his friend, Ron just stood there and leaned up against the wall as Eddie began to talk. Hello. Eddie started as he too leaned up against the wall. Hello, Eddie. This is your mom. How are you doing? The voice of an older woman said. Instantly, Eddie felt as though his legs were gonna fall out from under him. Eddie had almost forgotten that he had biological family. He was shocked. I'm doing all right. Well, Eddie. I'm calling to say happy birthday. Beth interrupted. As she listened carefully, all that she could hear was Eddie's breathing on the other end of the line. Eddie, please say something. Wah. What can I say? I haven't heard from you once since I was 12 years old. In fact, the last time that I spoke to you was on my 13th birthday. Today I'm turning 24. Pausing, Eddie turned to face Ronnie. What do you want me to say? I'm sorry, honey. We've just been so busy that I didn't think. What? Didn't think that you had enough time to pick up the phone and say hi or something. Eddie interrupted. Though he spoke quietly on the phone, it was obvious that he was instantly angry. I'm sorry, honey. You're sorry. Eddie interrupted again. Well, I've got all the family that I need right here. And, you know, I'm not sorry. With this, Eddie immediately hung up the phone. The look on Eddie's face was that of anger and deep sadness as he reached out towards Ronnie to hand him the phone. As Ronnie received the phone, he saw a single tear running down Eddie's cheek. As Ron slipped the phone into his back pocket, he instantly reached out towards Eddie with his arm as he wrapped it around his friend. I'm sorry, Ronnie, Eddie said as he seemed to melt within Ron's arms. It's alright, Eddie, Ron said as he buried his face into the crook of Eddie's neck. It's gonna be alright. As Ron continued to hold Eddie, he could feel Eddie's body slowly relax. Moments later, Ronnie was supporting Eddie's entire body weight as they slowly lowered themselves to the floor. About an hour later, everyone else was up and sitting around the table for breakfast. As Malachi had noticed Eddie slowly dipping a piece of toast into the center of an egg yolk, it had also dawned on Malachi that Eddie hadn't said much that morning either. Hey Eddie. What's going on, man? Today is your birthday and you don't look very happy. Not much. Eddie responded, just don't really. Hey Malachi. Ron interrupted, would you come with me please? Ron requested as he suddenly got up from the table. Immediately, Malachi stood up from the table and followed his little brother out the room. As they left the kitchen, Eddie pushed his chair back from the table and then, rather than getting up, just rested his head in the palms of his own hands as he rested his elbows on his knees. Eddie. What's going on? Nicole asked as she immediately got up and went to his side. With the girls on either side of him, Eddie soon began to quietly cry. Hey Eddie, Malachi said as him and Ronnie both returned to the kitchen. Immediately Eddie looked up toward him as the girls continued to rub his back and console him. Yeah. You know, Eddie. Ron just told me what happened a little while ago. And you know, no matter what choices you make in regards to your family, we will always be your family. Hell, as far as Ronnie and I are concerned, you're not just our best friend, but you are our brother as well. We love you and we'll always be here for you." "What happened?" Nicole asked as she looked at Ronnie. "Eddie's mom called this morning. For the first time since his 13th birthday. She hasn't written him, sent any emails, or made any other attempt, of any kind, to contact him until now. And that was just to say happy birthday." "My God. I'm sorry, Eddie," Nicole said as she gently hugged him. "But you know," she continued, "Malachi is right, we are your family, and we all love you very much. Grandma Sanchez tells you to call her grandma, Karina tells you to call her mom. I'm serious, Eddie, we are your family." As Nicole spoke, Ronnie walked over to and behind Eddie. Gently, Ronnie hugged Eddie, from behind, as he whispered into his ear. "Ever since you moved in here with us, Eddie, I've always looked up to you as an older brother. Just as I do with Malachi." Gently, Eddie raised his arms and then held onto Ronnie's forearms. Then, as he done this, Eddie carefully pulled Ron's arms, causing the hug to be even tighter. "Thank you guys," Eddie started, "without you guys, I wouldn't have anyone. I love all of you guys very much." "Well, Eddie, it may not be the best birthday present in the world, but we love you. And you are our brother," Malachi said as he sat back down at the table across from Eddie. "No. The best birthday present, to me, is knowing that you guys have always been my brothers and sister. And the realization that your parents are as close to real parents, to me, that I've ever had. Well, what do you say that we go rent a couple movies, get some ice cream?" Suddenly the phone rang, interrupting Malachi. "Hello," Malachi said after picking the cell phone up off of the counter. "Hey honey. This is Mom. Would you please put Eddie on the phone for me, Malachi?" "Yeah. Hold on, Mom." Walking over to Eddie's side, Malachi handed him the phone. "Hello," Eddie said. "Hey Eddie. This is Karina. I just wanted to say happy birthday to you for David and I." "All right, buddy. Thank you, Mom. I really appreciate it," Eddie said. With his words, it looked as though he might cry again.